So team, we are going to put up an exhibition on the food of Indus Valley, and that will be the pilot for One Station Million Stories. Okay. So today I'm going to sit and distribute the work. You are going to work on the content. So I will be giving you a line of things to do. So the highlight happens to be what is going to be served, the food, and it is going to be accentuated by the content. So there is going to be an event. There's going to be a place where you will have information panel. We will be developing a virtual tour for which you will be giving us the script. Sabrina, you have to go to the museum, do a certain set of photographs.
Ma'am, what kind of objects do you want me to photograph?
When you go to the museum, there will be, I'll give you two types of camera apart from your phone. It is likely to be dark. So you are going to select those objects which are related to food production, food serving, food preparation and different forms of preparation, and in a way which is shows the evolution of food preparing system. So you are looking at the stone axes, you're looking at stone tools, you're also looking at cutting edges, metal tools, stonewares like the querns, the pistols, you're looking at pots, storage wares, everything to do with food, so that the entire narrative can be tied down.
So ma'am, what is the time duration for the preparation of the exhibition and how are we distributing the work?
I'll give you about a month and a half to read, to figure out certain things. I'll give you pointers, but work starts today. Saad, you're going to help us with the graphics. So we have graphics for event, we have graphics for eating, backdrops have to be made.
So ma'am, how many panels will be there?
Saad, we'll have tentatively 17 panels. I do not want more number of panels, and in each panel you are going to have less than 100 words because people otherwise find it difficult. Others, we have to work out what are the different food platters, sizes, content. We have a set of veg, we have a set of non-veg ingredients. We have to work out a tasting schedule so we can finalize the menu. What you will be doing is sitting and writing down a description of how this menu was created, and you will have to sit down to figure out how the recipes will work and tentative cost for the plates. And we have to do some amount of sponsorship, rounds of sponsorship. So we'll have to work out a financial model that works with the chef. We are also looking at some form of cookware sponsors, metalware sponsors, anything to do with the kitchen. So if any one of you actually know people who are likely to sponsor, please start identifying. So does anybody have any particular question?
Yeah, who's the chef? Who's cooking the food? We've discussed everything. Where is the chef?
We have to look for one. Hi Ali, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
So we're putting up this exhibition. It has to do with Indus food. You have about tentatively a month and a half. What we need from you are certain graphics, certain explanatory graphics. Say there are about 17 panels, the size being 6 feet by 3 feet. So you can't have any of these graphics bleeding more than 3 feet. But I want you to give about 1.5 inches of extra space around each of the graphics so we can clip it. Some graphics will go for a game, and it'll be a game on a tab, and a couple of graphics we'll use to make interpretation cards.
We at Shabdo, we do a lot of creative communication work. We do films, we help children write, we help adults write. So I'm sure you're looking for people-friendly language. Since we work with children and youth, and that is what our forte is.
Our team Shabdo with team OSMS can get together. We provide 360 degrees communication, including videos, websites, other social media services. We can all sort of put it together. It becomes understandable to the general public.
शोमी तुम जाओगे शिंजिनी शर्मिला दी एंड मिंची फूड कोर्ट में उसके बाद मैं जाऊंगा अभिजीत दा सुदीप्तो रिसेप्शन पे सबरीना एंड यू विल आल्सो हैव टू गो हियर एंड देयर एंड एवरीवेयर
So the sixth thing is likely to be the IT component.
हाँ सो ये यहाँ पे आया
This exhibition is based on the premise that it's environmental affordance and only environmental affordance that affects human dietary habits, and the study of human dietary habits is in a way a telltale sign of how our world changed, how we responded to climate change, and how we can actually be resilient and food secure. We're taking today the route of what is called ethno-archaeological construct of a period in history which we really did not think can tell us too much about our present day eating habit. But while we worked over it for about 4 years' time, we realized that this is possible. It actually answers a lot of questions which can help us see through how human beings evolved, then they changed their landscape and their eating habits, and how the landscape changed them in return, and how today we become a more food secure culture. For this particular exhibition, we stop at the Indus Valley civilization because it's somewhere our very own. It explains our innate habits. So let's first have a look at how we evolved. We go step by step through this entire journey, and I get the opportunity of explaining to you how we transformed the world while we transformed ourselves. What food has to do with our evolution. A lot of theories and a lot of other explanations also directly point to the fact that we practically ate our way and became Homo sapiens. And the second interesting thing is, we are the only cooking animal. And this point makes us so very different. This whole word called intelligence, that human intelligence is the topmost in the pyramid, in the ecosystem chain. It's the cooking part of it that makes us at the top, the apex predator. Now let's go back a couple of millions of years ago, not just a couple, it's about 6.5. Now we didn't cover every species, but we covered those which are most, which explains how we changed with food and food changed us. Let's go back and see what Sibapithecus did and how his existence was made possible because of food, and how he evolved to Australopithecus first. So if we were always on our fours and on the ground, the amount of food resources, or rather the access to that food resources, was always restricted. You were on the ground, you could not have reached up, but the problem is, which means we competed with more number of smaller creatures for our basic food. So by the time, because we exhausted food which was near to the ground at the base level, that means, which means we were looking at tubers, we were looking at berries, small food sources which had carbohydrate, basic starch in it, we had to start reaching slightly above to the upper reaches of trees. That's probably one of the reasons, this to ensure search for food is complete. We started having a frame which is slightly taller. So we started towards getting towards erect. Now we started losing muscles on our shoulders. We had a frame that could walk faster, use limbs which stretched out. By this time we had started eating raw meat, tuber, something like fruits. So the interesting thing is, by this particular 5 million years ago, we were quite conscious about what we could have eaten and what we cannot eat because it's probably poisonous. Then the next stage, and another important thing is, if you see the jaw structure in this era, these jaws were broader and we were always chewing, so the motion is always grinding motion. We began losing our teeth structure. This jaw started becoming much more thinner, slimmer by the time we became Homo habilis. Now, between 5 to 2.6 million years ago, another interesting thing is the climate started changing. So, if you do follow the timeline below, you will see that with the change in climate, with the change in the number of food sources, people were using more amount of extracting more number of tubers. So, mashed tubers, the evidence of tools for mashing, for denaturing and to break down food sources became important for survival. Another thing is the brain sizes started expanding and we were moving towards higher, allowing higher cognitive functions. The third important stage is Homo erectus, where you finally were able to have bipedal movement. The running became much more effortless. They were able to reach out. People by this time were able to control fire, not create fire, because creating fire, people could have lost their ecosystem. Then came this period of time where two different species who were similar but not the same existed at the same point in time. One were the Neanderthals, were supposed to be closer cousins where we did share some DNA, and the other was Homo sapiens. But Homo sapiens outate and outran the Neanderthals, and we became, by the time it was 0.125 million years ago, we became the only human species, hominids, non-ape hominids, to be capitalizing and colonizing a large part of the world. We started migrating along these routes to first different parts of Africa, then followed routes to different parts of Europe, and thereafter to the Americas. Now, at this point of time, the sea level was at least 1200 mm lower than present. We used every ice sheet, that is to cross the Bering. We used land bridges and we made our way straight down till Australia. Now, by this time we were transitioning into the phase called, this is around pre-12,000 years ago, we were transitioning into a phase of hunter-gatherer settlers. So, 12 to 15,000 years ago, we were on the verge of transitioning into what is called the Neolithic era. Imagine you are living the life of a hunter-gatherer. For a second, close your eyes and try to imagine what are the different actions that you would be taking up. Can you even name one action which does not have food sourcing involved in it? You are likely to draw out a picture with a lot of people fishing, with a lot of people hunting, tending fire, even art, language. All of this is a gift of how people started eating, how the eating habit ultimately changed lifestyle. Now, there are three different important takeaways where food and human evolution and lifestyle changes are concerned. Number one, when we were hunting, to make sure that hunts are successful, we had to collaborate. Without a successful hunt, we will perish, we will die hungry. Therefore, we had to stop chewing. We had to stop chewing really hard food. So, the use of tools to pound, to cook, to the use of fire, to roast, to bake, changed the texture of the food first, then allowed us to make necessary phonetics, guttural sounds, to be able to develop some kind of language. The second part of it is we had already had the base, the brain size, to develop what is called higher cognitive functions. One of the symbols of higher cognitive functions is art. art and language go hand in hand. The moment we had art and language together, we also were able to communicate the fact how this particular land parcels may be selected, may be tilled continuously, prepared, the soil has to be prepared to be able to select the right kind of cereals and replant them over generations to create what we get as pulses, legumes, wheat, barley today. The other important thing is, by the time it was 12,000 years, people were showing tendency to settle. Now, the tendency to settle was because of the kind of food generation sources which also made it possible to sustain a larger population. Now watch this. If you were using a grinding stone, which people did, you needed to prepare the grinding stone for over successive years so that it gives you the perfect mashed and pounded seeds. Now on a daily basis, if somebody were to use wooden mashers, it would not give them the same texture. Now literally the same grinding stone started getting bigger, heavier, and technically pinned people down, making it effortless to settle. By the end of 12,000 BCE, we had another warm air period. During this warm period, the sea level started rising to at least 900 mm. That's 900 mm above what was around the 15,000 BCE. Between the 15,000 and 12,000 BCE, we had a mild rise in temperature, almost 3 degrees. By this time, due to the rise in temperature, the sea level rose. The ice sheet started disappearing and the land that was once accessible over sea, over other land bridges, started becoming inaccessible. People had to settle. In the same landscape, they had once started foraging, hunting. Now we'll go over to the next slide. This is a world that shows the settlement pattern between 16,000 to 3000 BCE. There are 3 key major determinants as to how and why humans migrated, dispersed, and created an agricultural based lifestyle that is transitioning from a hunter-gatherer to a settler farmer, or at least showing the tendency to leave their nomadic life and become something quite similar to what we see in our villages. This is the zone where life first started. Humans, the Civipithecus, came on the ground, became ultimately Homo sapiens. From this route, they started going northwards into Europe, this area. This fertile crescent is the first place which shows evidence of consistent farming. During this period of time, we also started seeing fisher-gatherer settlements, we had other hunter-gatherer settlement, we had widespread of farming. If we follow these 3 colors, we have widespread farming. Now interestingly, there are 4 different monsoon patterns that affect climatic conditions in this particular zone, and it also determines what life can be in this particular area. What we do have is our eastern system. This is the Bay of Bengal monsoon system, this is the winter monsoon system, this is the Arctic monsoon system and Arabian sea monsoon system of the western side. Now notice this, every 2000 years there is always going to be a shift or a switch between the eastern and the western system. When the western system is stronger, the eastern system is weaker, and then the cycle turns. In the 8.2 kilo year event, what happened interestingly is that the western monsoon systems, that is your Arabian Sea monsoon system and the Arctic monsoon system, started becoming stronger than the eastern side. This had an effect on how settlement systems developed in our northwestern frontiers. We will go over to the next slide to see what was the kind of distribution and settlement pattern that emerged around 6000 BCE. So in 6250 BCE, that's the 8.2 kilo year event, interestingly, a lot of these farming or proto-farming settlements started emerging in the bordering areas of northwestern frontiers. Interestingly, they could not settle along the river because by this period, the Indus River, you see this, was facing channel shift by about 140 kilometers. So it moved, the channel migrated from the east towards the west to almost 140 kilometers. So during this period of time, that 6000 BCE, what we did see among settlers is that to make sure that the river did not wash their existence, they were on the hilltops during the monsoon period, whereas during the winter period, they were climbing down and they were along this riverbed and they would cultivate. So it was a single cropping system, and whereas they reverted to hunting and pastoral gathering during the monsoon period. This continued for nearly 3000 years, and this periodic fluctuation also shows that the settlements, when they were on the plains, were never in the same location and often shifted just as the river shifted. Now, I will take you to a time period which is close to 3500 BCE and straight down to 1700 BCE, the whole period of time when the Indus Valley civilization was at its rise, and then I wouldn't use the word decline, I would say then people depopulated. When we come to the period between 3500 to 1700 BCE, we see almost 1 million square kilometer area settled that's followed this entire line that we know, and nearly over 850 sites and still counting. Urban settlement with urban areas, rural areas, hinterland, trade linkages developed in this system, river system and river valley. Now, what we do see interestingly is that a wide variety of food products have been identified by archaeologists during excavation. So, let us follow these particular signs in our map. We did find evidence of fish bones, of animal bones, of wheat, barley, millet, legumes, lentils, rice, flax. We did find evidence of coriander, ginger, garlic, turmeric, and a host of other material that could go up to 100. So they did have a wide variety of diet, a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetable, and a whole lot of farmed products. In this entire spread area, archaeologists interestingly found kitchens, evidence of different types of storage like pit storage or storage in the form of jars. Archaeologists found what is called hearth. Right now we will call cooking space as kitchen only for the sake of brevity, but otherwise people cooked in different spaces. What I would take you now is how people farmed, how people secured resources, and how these resources allowed them to become a very prolific civilization. Now, I take you somewhere in the highest point of the civilization, or what is called the mature Harappa phase. Say around 2000 BCE, what you did have a different type of farming techniques. Look at this picture. This is the evidence of the Khadin system of farming in Kalibangan. When the archaeologists started doing a Reiki survey of the area around the excavated site, they did find similar traces of the kind of farming that would have been practiced nearly 2000 years before. Now, if you compare the two pictures, it brings us to question one thing. Are we really that different? Because this shows quite a similarity in terms of continuing traditional practices. I would also like you to note two very important archaeological finds. One is an axe, the axe head, and one is a plough. Now the thing is, between the axe and the plough, human beings by this period of time, and whether it is the Indus or any other culture, literally changed how natural landscape was perceived. People cleared land, people reclaimed earth. so that they could not only farm, they could generate more food, therefore more resources and security, but most importantly, they were also taking away a lot of earth with which they were building these large cities. This is a very typical, it gives you a view of an Indus city, which says that outside the city, if you were to have farmland, what are the different range of activities that you could have witnessed around 2000 BCE. So what you would have had is farming, movement of farm animals. You would have had record keeping, because the Indus people are known for their seals which were used for records. You would see different types of food processing. In 2250 BCE, the reversal was complete. What happened is that the central Indus basin and all the areas that were dependent on rainfall started losing rainfall. There was severe drought, severe famine. However, people could not stop producing. They could not stop producing and clearing land and extracting more from land. To substantiate the demand for water, people developed elaborate network of canals and trenches to ensure that there was a constant supply of water to fields, and definitely to ensure that bountiful agricultural produce. So between the axe and the plough, the very civilization that started with the premise of more farming means more food security was facing environmental degradation and climate change. The impact and the spread of trade that was possible around mature Harappan city. Look at this million square kilometer of a very urban, or rather a very prolific settlement practice, and look at its trade network. From Egypt to almost Koldiva in the Gangetic plains, and all in Rajasthan, and probably also a lot of the Deccan was within the trade reach. Now it brings us to question that since they were trading food material, since they were trading agricultural produce, would they not also source at least some amount of prized food material from other local contemporary culture? So what about pepper, cinnamon? What about long pepper? Could it be possible that to substantiate the absence of spices, because we only found coriander, ginger, garlic, they were trading or bringing in some amount of prized pepper? Now look at the trade practice of the Harappans, straight from Egypt to Koldiva in the eastern Gangetic plains, and perhaps they had a reach in the Deccan as well. Now, when we started mapping out the material that was exported, we had a large range from wood, stone, agricultural produce, cotton, textile. These were non-perishable items largely, and therefore we do find some amount of evidence of what went outwards. Now, interestingly, we find very little material that came inwards. Is it possible that the Harappans brought in a lot of perishable material, like say pepper or cardamom or some amount of cinnamon, which were all local, probably available to the Deccan, but may not be available otherwise except for trade to the people of this area? Now, we always have the penchant, or we always crave for something that is exotic. Is it possible that they did bring in such spices which were not available locally to this particular landscape? We will take you to a kitchen, we will take you to see what kind of utensils were used to be able to explain what did they do with so much of food material. So let me take you back to a kitchen that belongs to the Harappa period. Now have a look at this. This is what the excavators found in Kalibangan, and it shows 3 different places where hearths were located. Now when I say hearth, these are called the types of hearths, and these were generally chulas or tandoors, and it was interchangeably used to produce both food and maybe to fire pottery, to fire bead, to be firing seals, etc. People did not waste any heat source because it was difficult to generate heat. It came at the cost of environment. Specifically, if we were looking at a kitchen in the late Harappa period, we were looking at a period of time that was marked by less of rain and denuding natural resources. Now, apart from Kalibangan, we also found the excavated evidence of another kitchen in Harappa. Now, if we look at the proportion between the cooking space and the dustbin, it is possible that very little rubbish or very little garbage was actually thrown out. Is it possible that the way we refuse a lot of parts of food today, people were actually consuming it? Because otherwise this small dustbin may not suffice at all. I would like you to see this one picture, which is also what the excavator found. These are pictures that were donated by Dr. Mark Kenoa, and this is the same kitchen space. Another interesting thing is, so he surveyed the whole of Harappa village much later and he found the same type of hearth. So that's point number 2, that A, we continued with farming, B, we continued with the type of hearth. So it still brings me to question, did we change that much? Or is it just that some materials changed, we could afford and we could bring in certain number of exotic items, or we could plant certain number of other items, but we still consume something which is very similar. So the next time that you see a dabber, a cleaver, a fish hook or a lance, you go back 5,000 years or more and actually see society transition from a nomad, a hunter-gatherer, to someone who was settled. Now this entire set of wares, these are the source wares, the cookwares, the serving wares, the storage wares of the Indus people. This is just the tip of the iceberg. If you were to walk into the gallery, you would find thousands and thousands of pieces that were primarily related to food. And whether it's the sourcing of food, whether it's the cooking of food, it's the serving of food or the storage of food. It's almost that we archive food history, but we do not talk about what was it used for or what happened with it. Did you eat, did you serve, or what you did with it. Now note this, it is important to talk about this because this is a very simple looking pot. If you were handed over this pot, you may not be even looking at it twice. But now the interesting thing is, this base, the thick coarse base, allowed people to be slow cooking in this pot without cracking the pot, which means they knew how to manipulate material and ensure that the food is most perfectly cooked and not charred and not burnt. So the next time that you see a mortar and a pestle or a quern or a sickle, think about how these little tools transitioned people from nomads to a completely settled form that we see today. What you do see here are different types of hearths that were designed specifically for different functions. So whether it was for milk, whether it was for rotis, whether it was for any other type of food, their tandoors, their chulas, their doodh karnas or bharolis were designed to ensure that only a certain type of food is cooked in a certain type of hearth. Another interesting thing is, they first started probably using firewood, which denuded forest, but was a good source of cooking fuel. Later, they started using cow dung, and this made sure that the temperature rose from 300 to almost 600 degrees. Secondly, the flames reached not just the bottom, but the top of the rims, which means food cooked evenly. Now, I would like you to see these pots, specifically the polychromatic wares in the gallery. Now think about this. Every time we talk about a culture which is old, which is ancient, and specifically when we use the word ancient, we always think they're probably slightly crude, or maybe they would not be sophisticated as much as modern humans or humans today. Just serve wares. Look at the evenness of design. Look at the aesthetic quality. Do you really think that people who were capable of keeping these ornamental cookwares would have eaten something or would have even produced something that was not beautiful? So therefore, one of the brief given to the chef was the food must have some amount of umami effect. That is, it should emit a guttural reaction even when you're looking at it. For some culture who is so sophisticated and particular about every cookware like this, even the simple everyday cookware, do you think they would eat something which is not aesthetically pleasing? We don't believe so. Don't assume that they ate crude food. For a culture who had a particular set of cookware, a particular set of serveware, a particular set of storageware, where everything is aesthetically treated, they are unlikely to eat food which is also not aesthetics. They may be functional food, there may be aesthetics which may not appeal to very commercial clientele, but they will still be having aesthetically pleasing food, which also means their food is going to have wholesome taste. If you were to look at this particular set of exhibits, this is a distillation kit. Try assembling a distillation kit, because this is your survival. People would be traveling way into the desert, long along the coast without water for days. The survival in the desert would literally depend on being able to assemble these complicated contraptions. Now when we come to about 1700 BCE, that is about the closing years of the Harappa culture, we know that cooking spaces were in 3 different locations in a house. It could have been located outside, that is in the open, or it could have been located in an open space but attached to the house, or it could have been located interiors, that is in the most secured space. Now human behavior studies indicate to the fact that when food insecurity rises, kitchens are known to migrate from the most public of spaces, that is outside in the open, to the most private and the most guarded spaces, because this is where you crave for security. It is possible that in the closing years, people would have used food as a source of comfort. What we are likely to see is a kitchen which would have had a lot of storage, which would have had a lot of food, because you are trying to comfort yourself that this is not a food insecure time. So likely a kitchen would be well stocked but located within a room, and no longer would you be using a kitchen which is out in the open. We have developed a model kitchen from an archaeological find. We had a plan, we got a drawing, we found evidence of hearths, evidence of cookware, evidence of ash. It was in Harappa. Imagine a time period when you were famine struck, yet you could use food for all the comfort. First we established what people ate, then what was the guttural reaction and how people evolved with food, then how people generated food, then settled and grew with food, and then when it was food insecure, what was the specific reaction to food. Let's see these 14 sets of images. Now if you see these closely, it is only step 11, 12, 13, 14 that you see in our houses every day. And because we choose to forget what happened between 1 to 10, we can afford to waste even one roti. Because when we throw even a little morsel, you're throwing at least 15,000 years of human legacy. Think before you waste food, because we are standing at a period of time when the climate is changing and we will be food insecure unless we check wastage. Now I'll show you how bread was broken in Harappan style. Now bread is such an important element that it changed the way human societies were formed. First thing, the oldest bread was really coarse, hard and dry. But that coarse, hard and dry bread allowed us to eat stored and processed food. It is our first generation processed food, and we were cooking. So when humans cooked, we became different from animals for perpetuity. So one of the greatest mysteries that the Indus civilization holds is that everybody disappeared. Now, people, cultures don't disappear. They probably move, they migrate, they resettle. Now, geneticists and evolutionary scientists and people studying the DNA have pointed out the fact that it is possible that a lot of ethnic communities who inhabit today's landscape, it's specifically in the Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, the northern belt, and perhaps along the coast, could still be bearing the same cultural traits. I wouldn't know whether at this point of time for sure they do bear the cultural traits, but if we were to map certain very innate food habits, dietary habits, we do see some resemblances and some unmistakable, or rather undeniable commonalities. Basic food or innate food and whatever bears umami taste has a deep permeated link. Is it not time that we start studying food once again through this lens, just to see how much is continuity and how much the thread of continuity can bind us together? To do this kind of research, we had over 750 different research articles, books, papers, dialogues with people, just to be able to stitch a coherent story that explains, or rather it explains and supports the chef as to prepare one of the iterations of a possible Harappa meal. Now, we had to cull down some of the selected ones, as in just about 157 of them, and we have a selected bibliography which supports us to do this type of research and present these facts to you. We do not present conclusions, we present a possibility, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you.
OSMS was a very, I would say, a unique journey when we were working on the idea of having virtual museums at all our redeveloped stations, because each railway station carries a history, and the place where it is located also carries a history. So, history of railways and the history of place, how we can combine that and create million stories to make the journey of railways to all the visitors to the station, be it passengers or the guests who would be coming to either receive somebody or leave somebody at the station, their journey interesting, so that our railway stations, they truly become the heart of the city, where culture and heritage plays an important role. So, I am very happy that the name which we coined during one of the meetings as One Station, Million Stories, OSMS, has come this way, and I am very happy to see it culminated into this wonderful idea.
I'd like to thank the National Museum, Chef Sabi, and Miss Chatterjee of One Station Million Stories for organizing this absolutely splendid exhibit. I have been fascinated by the Indus Valley ever since I read about it years ago, and I'm especially interested in the cuisine of the Indus Valley. And this exhibit and demonstration at the National Museum is one of the most wonderful experiences I've ever had.
अभी हिस्ट्री को समझने के लिए हमको एक नया टेक्निक का अपनाना पड़ेगा। ये जितने बीज जो हमको हड़प्पा मोहनजोदड़ो से मिले हैं, वो हमको समझते थे और हम उनको समझते हैं। उनके डीएनए में हमारा हिस्ट्री है और हमारे डीएनए में उनका हिस्ट्री है।